We're going to begin today with the latest on the Liberal leadership race. We did get a bit of a clearer picture today on where some Liberal cabinet ministers stand on running, including a potential frontrunner saying he will not be putting his name forward.
The most important thing I should do over the next few months is my job as Minister of Finance and Intergovernmental Affairs. I will be solely focused on the real economic threat that American tariffs represent to the Canadian economy and to Canadian workers. It's a full-time job.
So Dominic LeBlanc is out, but other ministers said today they are still considering whether to run for the top job.
I'm seriously considering a bid for the leadership, but we need to know the rules.
I've been reflecting.
I am absolutely considering running and putting my name forward for a leader.
I certainly have been considering it, and I am continuing to have discussions with my colleagues.
Indigenous Services Minister Patty Hajdu just left that caucus meeting, and she joins me in the studio now. Minister, it's good to see you.
Good to see you, David.
It's been a week for you and your party. I mean, how are you feeling now that the caucus has met and discussed what next steps might be?
You know, there was an option of attending caucus virtually. I'm really glad I chose to come to Ottawa. It was really nice to see colleagues from across the country come together. This is a pivotal time for the Liberal Party, and you heard clips of different individuals considering a potential run at leadership. I know that this is a deeply important subject for not just Liberals, but really for Canadians who are watching closely.
How rattled do you think is your caucus here? Or is rattled even the right word? How do you assess the mood of the MPs? Because there have been months of these sort of internal battles, right, of people trying to force the Prime Minister to make the decision he made on Monday. Now here we are. So are things pulling together, or how would you describe it?
I think it's too early to say, and I think that there's a range of reactions across caucus. Obviously, you heard over a number of months from members of Parliament that didn't want the Prime Minister to continue in his role as leader of the Liberal Party. But you also heard, I'm sure, from members of the Liberal caucus that felt differently. And I think today was a day of reflection, but it was also a day to understand more clearly from the party itself what the next steps will be in terms of seeking the replacement leader and how that will play out, not just for members of Parliament, but for Liberal members across the country.
From what your caucus colleagues have said on camera when they came out of the meeting, and what some others have said to me in texts and phone calls, is that the focus was really on having a tight timeline for this race, as short as possible runway without making the process unfair to everybody, but really beefing up the security around how the voting and who can vote to protect against foreign interference. Would you agree that that is sort of the consensus of where the caucus is?
Certainly the general themes, yeah, that we definitely need a process that's tight, that's clean, and that we protect the integrity of the election of the leader itself. Of course, I think members of Parliament come with a vast range of experiences, and some of them, as you know, have their security clearances, have been members of NCCOP, have significant experience to be able to help provide input to the party. And I'm really grateful for the executive of the board, all of them who are volunteers, working so hard right now to incorporate the perspectives of members of Parliament and indeed some of these, I would call them experts in this space.
Well, there's been this frenzy of formal and informal meetings really over the past 5-6 days, reaching out to potential candidates, organizers, camps, cabinet ministers presumably, and others on what to do. And the Liberal executive is going to meet tomorrow, as we understand it. How quickly do you need clarity so that this process can start? Because the runway to the return of Parliament is short, and then there's a confidence vote staring you right in the face, as you're well aware. When do you need an answer from the Liberal Party on what the rules are, do you think, so you can move forward?
Well, I think the balance is, and I think this is always the challenge when you're working on things that have, a very conclusive end date. The balance is getting that balance right between something that's efficient, but also something that's fair is what the party board is grappling with right now. And I have every confidence that they heard today, and I think they likely knew this before hearing from members of Parliament, that we need a process that's extremely quick, but also that's very fair. We want a Liberal Party leader that's elected that has the confidence of not just Liberals, but Canadians that may be nonpartisan, that may be watching from their homes what the next steps are. And that confidence comes from a transparent process that is a fair process and is an understandable process.
I know you were loyal to the Prime Minister, as a member of his cabinet and supported his leadership. I mean, where are you now that there is a race? I don't know if you have ambitions of your own, but have you, if not, have you decided on who you would like to see succeed and replace Justin Trudeau as leader?
You know, I really haven't, and I've had the incredible privilege of serving Canadians over the last 9 years in a variety of roles, 4 to be exact, 5 if you count FedNor, which is an important portfolio as well. Over the last 9 years, through the grace of the Prime Minister, really, who, as you know, makes decisions about who will serve in cabinet. I've also had the extraordinary pleasure of being the Member of Parliament for Thunder Bay Superior North. Had an opportunity to get to know my riding in a way and in a depth that I don't think most people in Thunder Bay actually know. It's a big riding. It's you know, slightly smaller than the geography of France. It's an incredible place. So for me, I will be watching very closely what the values of the leaders are and what their vision is in terms of the next steps, not just for obviously the Liberal Party in a very critical time, but what their vision would be for the country. And I think for me, as you know, as a Liberal, but as a Member of Parliament, as an independent individual, as a Canadian, I want to make sure that the candidate will match the values that I carry, and so I'll be watching closely.
What about your candidacy in the next election? Does this in any way, what's happened, affect that? Do you plan to run again, or does it depend on the leadership?
I'm a fully nominated candidate for Thunder Bay Superior North. I'm really proud to be the Member of Parliament, and I'll be continuing to seek that role. Obviously, this prorogation gives me more time to spend in my riding, which, as I mentioned, is vast. So it is actually difficult to get out to some of the more remote areas of my riding, and this gives me some time to spend in some of the smaller communities and some of the First Nations in my own riding, to really listen to their thoughts about the next election, but also what their hopes and dreams are for Canada and their, you know, and their priorities are in the next few months and years.
Dominic LeBlanc bowed out today, issuing a statement, and based on the messages that I've seen and received, and people saying they're trying to talk him out of it, he disappointed a lot of people who were counting on him to get into this race. I mean, what is your sense of what that does to this contest? Because my read of it was he would probably get substantial support from the Atlantic Caucus. He had a lot of Quebec MPs apparently willing to support him. What do you think his departure does to this particular contest right now?
I think it's too early to say. I think it's hard for me to project how this race is going to look because we still don't, as your opening clip indicated, have really confirmed candidates. Many of them are waiting to see what the rules will be for the leadership race. And I think once we have a slate of candidates, I think Liberal MPs and Liberals across the country will have a clearer sense of who they want to put their backing towards. And I think that that will unfold in the time that it should.
You say prorogation gives you more time to spend time in the vast riding that you represent, but it's meant the end, or at least you'll have a reset of clean drinking water legislation that you were advancing in your role as minister, and it's created some uncertainty perhaps around the child welfare negotiations you're doing. I know you've decided as a government to negotiate with specific regional groups and provincial groups rather than dealing with the AFN right now on advancing that because it was rejected at their last meeting. How do you advance that now with the uncertainty in the way the government is going to have to function over the next little while and with everything Donald Trump is doing?
Well, I mean, the reality with prorogation is it doesn't stop government work. It stops House of Commons work. And so we won't be going to question period. We don't have parliamentary committees. You know, there are processes that, you know, are freed up for members of parliament to spend time in their own ridings or on other work. But as a minister, yes, you're right. My portfolio continues to be of priority. And so you've mentioned 2 priorities that have been efforts of the government over the last numbers of years. On clean drinking water, I'm deeply disappointed. And I mentioned this at Christmas time. There was an opportunity for the NDP and the Conservatives to accelerate that process and get that bill to Senate, to be able to stop the delays in the committees, delays that in many cases were frivolous, in many cases, you know, were in fact, the AFN and other Indigenous partners appealed with the NDP, appealed with the Conservatives to stop delaying that legislation. And it's my hope that, you know, if those parties are sincere about wanting, you know, excellent legislation that provides what I believe is true, and that is a human right to drinking water on First Nations, that they will allow for the House to continue that work when a Liberal leader is selected and when the House resumes. That is in the hands of the opposition parties, though. And as you know, the NDP have said that they will not support the government any further. So, quite frankly, Indigenous people are disappointed, and they have every right to be. This was a pivotal piece of work that was coordinated with First Nations people, and it reflects the hopes and dreams and the true rights of Indigenous people in that legislation.
On the child welfare reform, right? Because the AFN has rejected it in a vote nationally, but you're going to work with Ontario and other regional groups.
Right,
I mean, how do you?
Chiefs of Ontario.
Well, the AFN says they're disappointed with being left out. So how do you balance this now?
Well, there was a $48 billion deal that the chiefs across the country voted against, except for two of the four litigants, which was the Chiefs of Ontario and Anishinaabe Nation, which represents many First Nations in Northern Ontario. And in fact, those two organizations, who are two of the four litigants, said, we are satisfied with the agreement that we worked so hard on, and we would like to see an Ontario-specific agreement conclude and approach the government to do that work together. We think we can get that concluded before the end of this particular government. And I know that this is really important to Ontario First Nations families. They have had repeated supports by the members that they represent. And as I said, they were at the table throughout. So they fully know what's in the agreement, and parties are working very hard to finish that piece of work.
Minister Patty Hajdu, thanks for coming in on a busy day, a very busy week. It's good to speak with you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. 2 days after Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced he would step down, it's only been 2 days, the Liberal Caucus met with party executives to discuss how to replace him.
The next leader is somebody that's experienced.
I'm looking for a good communicator.
We need a leader that's going to be serious. We obviously need someone that is bilingual.
We need someone to address the most important and fundamental issues. I need someone that will be able to look Mr. Trump in the eye and negotiate on behalf of Canada.
We need a leader in place very early in March at the latest.
That new leader has to have time to be prepared and enter the House ready to go.
I have not yet made a decision, but I'm certainly actively considering it.
I've been reflecting. I very much know that I'm the Minister of Foreign Affairs at a time where it's extremely difficult.
It's going to be a rough couple of months, I think, with people beating each other to death.
All right, well, the timing of that beating each other to death is still unclear, as is the field of candidates. These are the top contenders out of the gate, or at least the names that were mentioned as possibly running. But today, Dominic LeBlanc, one of the most favorable names in the group, decided to opt out, while Employment Minister Stephen McKinnon took his place.
I was genuinely touched by caucus colleagues and Liberals across the country who encouraged me to consider seeking the leadership. But last night, and then after sleeping on it this morning, I decided that the most important thing I should do over the next few months is my job as Minister of Finance and Intergovernmental Affairs.
Well, some Liberal MPs emerged from today's caucus meeting saying they want Minister LeBlanc to reconsider.
Are you hoping Mr. Minister LeBlanc will reconsider?
Absolutely.
Yeah? Did you tell him that?
Yes, I did. He is highly respected amongst all of caucus, and I think of a lot of Canadians.
Dominic LeBlanc, should he change his mind?
He absolutely should. He has what it takes to beat Pierre Poilievre.
Do you think that there's enough of an effort to get him to reconsider running for leadership?
There's a lot of effort to do that.
Okay, it's time to bring in the power panel to talk about all of this. Amanda Alvaro is a former Liberal Party communications strategist. Here with me in the studio, Tim Powers is a former strategist for Conservative parties. Jordan Leichnitz is a former NDP strategist. And Sherelle Evelyn is the managing editor of The Hill Times, who I assume is 90% coffee, just like I am after this week. Amanda, help me understand the dynamic inside the party right now with Dominic LeBlanc bowing out, but with 10 other names still associated with things. Frank Baylis is the only one who is definitely in, it seems. Who is the front runner at this point, the most likely to get in, most likely to win?
Well, and maybe I'm going to start with an unpopular opinion, but I think that anyone who's seriously vying for this job is looking at this time and also looking at next time, because nobody wants to be the Kim Campbell of this party. Get the prime ministership for a couple of weeks, maybe a few months, head into election. If something doesn't change dramatically, we're heading in 20 points behind in the polls, a serious uphill battle to climb. And then, potentially they would be looking at a leadership review following that election, at which point another leader could take shape. You just have to look at Andrew Scheer or Erin O'Toole to see how that will play out. So I think that it's not surprising to me that some of the quote unquote front running candidates are making a decision maybe to hold back.
Oh, did we lose Amanda? I think. Oh, no, you're frozen. You're back. You froze on. They're deciding to hold back and then finish your thought.
Yeah, so I think that names like, Mark Carney, is Mark Carney interested in being, in best case, the leader of the opposition, and worst case, the third party, or even worse than that, leading in that way? Probably not. So I think that our biggest names like Mark Carney, even, Melanie Joly, Champagne, I think that those are people who may be looking at the prospect of coming into this, at the 2026 leadership convention.
Okay, it's way too early to speculate about 2026. We just started 2025, but I take your point. Sherelle, what's your read of it? I mean, there are mixed senses, about. I was told Champagne was definitely out. Then yesterday I was in his office doing an interview where he said, "Yeah, I'm thinking about it." And Melanie Joly said she's thinking about it, but we don't know. I mean, what's your sense of where things are right now in this?
Well, I do agree with Amanda that the names I think that would be what people would consider front runners, the person who would ultimately lead the party for any length of time, isn't in the mix, or is going to, or if they are in the mix right now, they're not going to ultimately enter this race for all the reasons Amanda has already outlined. On top of that, if you're talking about somebody who is, maybe a current cabinet minister, will they take Dominic LeBlanc's, example and try to say, okay, do I want to look like I'm putting country over party? Because if you want people to trust you and say, I want to be the leader and I know what it takes, and we have a very important fight that we're in right now with the United States, if I look like I care more about my own political ambitions than the focus and what's the benefit of the country, that's going to be, I think, a knock on them, especially when it comes to a general election. So do you want to be a footnote in history, or do you want to have a lasting legacy? So if somebody wants to come forward, I don't think we've actually seen, obviously nobody has declared fully except for Frank Baylis. Once the rules come out, whether or not cabinet ministers can run or not, that's going to I think play a pretty major role in the ultimate decision making. But I do think that will have to weigh in on some of these people's.
Yeah, and even Frank Baylis has said it depends on the rules. That's what he told me on the show last night. And Jordan, Sherelle's point about country over party. That was a persistent theme in my conversation with Minister Champagne yesterday, that Canada first, Liberal Party of Canada second, which also is a heck of a pitch to make to Canadians and Liberals as you contemplate a leadership. Where do you see things right now?
I think two things can be true at the same time. And the first thing that's true is the exact dynamic that Amanda described there, which is that this is an election in which the very best outcome that the Liberal Party can hope for is official opposition. Yeah. This is a save the furniture election. This is not one where they really have a realistic shot in government. But the second thing that's true is that if they run a leadership race that way, where it is uninspiring, where the strongest contenders stay out, it confirms that outcome. The best way for them to excite Canadians and to bring them to the party is to have a dynamic and interesting leadership race with strong and credible candidates. But I think Amanda's quite right that a lot of those folks are going to be looking at the math of this and judging whether they want to sit this one out and wait until the next round.
Tim, what do you think? I mean, so many people in the party, and I know none of the cabinet ministers went public saying he's got to go, but there were people in the cabinet who accepted the situation they were in. If they don't step up now, if Mark Carney doesn't run now, I mean, is there going to be a Liberal Party to lead?
Sometimes you have to run for the job when it's open, even though the prospects of being in that job long term are not great. There are some people who will want to still be that footnote in history. I mean, they're likely, whomever the leader is going to be, to break Charles Tupper's record, the shortest serving Canadian.
69 days,
69 days. They may not. To Amanda's point, just taking it in a slightly different direction, given the expectations are so low, there also may be the opportunity here, if whomever becomes the leader exceeds the Michael Ignatieff number and gets the Liberals into 50 or 60 seats, that person will be given a second chance. But what we haven't talked about, and is a huge issue, just ask Jean Charest, just ask Peter MacKay, ask the Carnival barker Kevin O'Leary, is money. Like, what's the fee? Because it's really hard, particularly when you're in opposition and perhaps in a difficult position in opposition to pay off leadership debts. So if the fee is $500,000, which is a rumor out there, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't, and I understand why they do that, to only get serious people
Well, you're
in.
picking a prime minister too. It's not just a leadership, it is the prime ministership for however long it is,
Yeah,
right?
and guess what? What is it? But as the former Liberal leadership candidate Don Johnson, the late Don Johnson, had to go and play the piano for years to go make money and make the money up. That's not insignificant.
Oh, I agree.
You can't just write a check, right, around all of this. Can I tell you one thing that's interesting is Steve McKinnon now putting his hand up. I wonder, Steve's a very smart operator. As Amanda knows, and as I think the rest know, Steve also was once the national director of the Liberal Party.
Yep.
He understands the rules and systems. Steve's in a unique place because though he represents a riding in Quebec, he's from Atlantic Canada. He's from PEI. He cut his teeth with Frank McKenna in New Brunswick, has a lot of connections out there. If you're Steve McKinnon, why wouldn't you throw your hat in if you can afford it? Nobody's expecting you. You've got nothing to lose. You elevate your status other than maybe the $500,000. But to Mark Carney, Christy Clark, and Chrystia Freeland, they're going to have to think long and hard about this because at least with two of them, Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney, they have pretty well established international reputations. And while it may be appealing to be the Prime Minister for less than 68 days, may also be very difficult to stomach that you couldn't go all the way. But you know what? Latvia beat Canada in the World Juniors. Nobody thought they could.
Canada left their best player off the roster, and here we are. But look, I've not heard 500,000. I've heard 250. Like I don't. But I don't think they know yet. Right? Is the thing, and the party executive is not going to meet until tomorrow, and I don't even know if they're going to finalize it then because there's still some things to sort out. But, you know, Amanda, to circle back to your point that maybe some people sit this one out, and Tim's point that maybe they want to wait till the prospects are better. I've only ever really covered provincial leadership races, and when people say, let's wait for the prospects to be better,
they don't ever.
when the prospects are better, someone hungrier and maybe better want it, and when the prospects are good, the job isn't open, you know? So if you want it, this is your chance, right?
Yeah, and listen, the calls are being made. You know, the organizations are being put together. There's no doubt that there's interest and excitement. I think the only point I was making is that for some people who may be looking at this as a short-term prospect, that may not be as appealing as holding back. But I don't think that we're going to end up with a small leadership race. I do think that there are going to be a number of candidates in the mix. I think that there are going to be a number of exciting, incredible candidates in the mix. And I think that there's going to be, the best thing is that there's going to be a discussion about how to rebuild the party, how to spark interest and participation and engagement in the party. And those things tend to follow leadership races. So I think that that's all good news for the party. I just think that given the prospects right now, given the numbers right now, it may be unlikely that some of the quote unquote best candidates run in this one.
Oh, yeah, look, I'm not saying your analysis was wrong. I'm just saying their thought process may not lead to the outcome they're plotting out well in advance.
Never does.
Right, but and Amanda, just to come back to you on this, one of the names I've heard as someone who is being, a lot of people, influential people are calling this person and people around her to get her to run is Karina Gould. And it's not necessarily to win this one, but seeing her as someone you can build around for the future. What have you heard anything about that? What's your sense of that?
Sure have. And, you know, I'm a fan. She's young. She's a young mom. She has time. And I can't remember who made this point a few minutes ago, but there is an outcome where the party does better than expected. And whoever is leading at that point gets the second chance. And somebody who's young and hungry, has fire in her belly, somebody who's, you know, made a lot of friends, great communicator, might be a person that the party wants to keep around. So she has not, in my opinion, she has nothing to lose.
Okay.
I think I froze again.
Yeah, no, you get right to this, you know, crescendo on your point, and it freezes up, right?
Moment, and then But I think if she's somebody who's looking at this more long term, and she's in a position where she could be raising her national profile. Remember, we also have to take a candidate now and have the country become familiar with them.
Right.
Some of these names are not names that the country knows. So if she's looking at a more long-term prospect, she would be one to watch, in my opinion.
Yeah, look, and they're going to have to roll Sherelle right from a leadership into a general, because they'll come back into Parliament, and let's face it, unless Jagmeet Singh changes his mind or Pierre Poilievre magically changes his mind, we're going to be going into an election. But just to focus on the internal machinations just for one more second, with Dom LeBlanc bowing out, it seemed like a huge number of caucus was ready to go to him. That just his basic retail political skills, his ability to think on his feet, to handle a guy like Poilievre, in the back and forth, they felt he gave them a really good chance in the election. Now, a lot of Quebec MPs, it sounded like, were ready to go with LeBlanc. What do you think that does to where caucus and some of the organizers who are apparently lining up with him are going to go?
Well, we also have the fact that there's some people who haven't let go of that potential, who want to see him run and who are still talking to him.
They need to move on, I think. Yeah. I don't think he's going to. This is not a woo me ploy. He's staying in finance.
He's made his decision, but the fact that they are publicly stating, "Oh, this would be great. You would be great. We really need this guy." That kind of signals something to kind of everybody else in the race to say, "Okay, how can I be a Dominic LeBlanc? How can I be the type of person that people will want to rally behind? What is he doing that I need to do more of?" That's not necessarily to say that we need everybody to be the same in this race. There does need to be a much more diverse range of people. Looking at the photos of everybody going up, I see 2 people of color out of the group of 10. I mean, there's still, I think, a ways to go in terms of who is going to be involved in this race. But I think ultimately people want, and what they're looking for right now is a steady hand, because there is so much tumult, and that's what he represents.
Yeah, I think economic bona fides are really going to matter in this one with Trump and the U.S. Totally. Just Jordan first, and Tim. What do you think?
Well, and I was going to say, I think it's frankly good news for the country that Don LeBlanc is staying where he is, because we're looking at a scenario now where a number of cabinet ministers may need to step out of their portfolios in order to pursue their leadership ambitions. And so having somebody there who does have that experience, that reputation, he's not called Mr. Fix-It for nothing, I think is probably good for the country. But those very same things actually probably would also be a challenge for him in a leadership race, because he is tied so closely to Trudeau, at a personal level, at a political level. So while that may be very appealing within caucus, and certainly I think he's got the political chops, that could prove challenging when he's out communicating with broader Canadian public who's looking to turn the page on that.
Yeah.
But the other appeal with Dom, and I think that's why it's so you've seen it be overwhelming with Liberals, is he talks to human beings like they're human beings.
It's a strange thing, to use the local language.
He's folksy, right? And he doesn't talk at people. He's liked by a lot of people because he can connect with them on different levels. Look at the relationship he has around the Premier's table, because he gets to know the person. And
Danielle Smith vouched for him on the show the other day.
And I mean, we have talked about this long before the Prime Minister decided to resign. One of the biggest challenges the Liberals have had for the last 2 years is connecting with people at a base level. This is where Poilievre has eaten their lunch. Yes, he may be jingoistic and driven by slogans, but he gets to people. He connects with people in a way that allows them to think that he feels their pain. The Prime Minister lost that ability somewhere along the way. Chrystia Freeland never had it until she wrote a letter, and because she wrote a letter, that would suggest to you her folksiness needs some work. The other one to watch on the folksy front, though, could be Christy Clark. Christy Clark, radio talk show host, good with people. I think that's why her potential candidacy is also exciting Liberals, because she can connect with human beings, and she's also been on the outside, though the challenge for Christy, as it is for any other former premier, is we've never had a premier go on to become Prime Minister, and they can't dismiss that history either.
Is that her challenge in the leadership race,
well,
or is it the fact that she took out a Conservative Party membership to vote in the last Conservative leadership race for Jean Charest?
Yeah, I don't
Liberals are mad about that.
Sure they are, and that happens on the other side too. But ultimately, if you are looking to win or get up to 50 or 60%, you do want somebody who can attract people who aren't Liberals, because apparently the only people other than Amanda who are Liberals are telephone booths that still exist, hiding out, waiting to come out till there's a new deity leading them.
It would certainly be good news for the New Democrats and open up more space on the center left for them.
Well, look, I've heard two things, and look, we're only 3 days into this, and I'm not picking on either Mark Carney or Christy Clark with this, but I have heard endlessly from Liberals about Christy Clark's interviews about why she took out that leadership membership to vote in the Conservative leadership and criticizing everything this government has done. But also then the other criticism is from Mark Carney that, oh, now you're interested? You know, so these are, because there isn't...
those are all normal criticisms in
yeah.
a leadership race. It's how you embrace them.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how that manifests itself in the short time frame, if there's enough time to help people get over those things, right? We'll see.